Morning about remembering, like I was talking about how my dad always remembered where he was. Hey, Jeremy, good to see you, buddy. My dad always knew where he was as a kid when JFK was assassinated. And as I think about today, I'm blown away that it's 19 years already. Um, but you're living a little closer to that area. Do you remember where you were?
I do precisely. It was about 8:30 in the morning, and I got off the train at Grand Central Station, headed into the East Side, 44th and First Avenue at the United Nations, where I used to work at the UN. And I
Ooh.
was there early in the morning, and we had 19 years ago, you could listen to the radio on the telephone, meaning because the building and wasn't wired for, but fancy corporate systems. You could listen to the news, dial into different rooms at the UN to hear the different discussions happening in all kind of language. Hola, ¿cómo está? Arigato. It was very cool. So I listened to 1010 Winds or WABC, whatever the local affiliate was, and you hear them, propeller plane may have hit the World Trade Center. Whoever's flying this morning, boy, the fire department's really going to have their hands full. Okay, back to our announcement, discount on coffee. Wait, no, that's not a propeller plane. And then, the talking heads that are, they're trained to talk in the spur of the moment, just in real time, chatting about what it could be. No, that's not a propeller plane, too much smoke. And then that's when all of us, probably 9 or whatever time it was, realized that it was probably a bit more. The first plane only. So I went outside because I knew many friends in security, and they were, I guess, news had traveled through whatever the security apparatus is. Security officers came out because we all assumed that the UN was going to be hit. That one of a few buildings, White House, UN, whatever. Get away, get away. I'm Jack Bauer, though. I didn't want to run away. I just wanted to be in the middle of it all. That's just how I am, no matter what's happening. I don't think often. My wife was hysterical. And so, but I'll wrap this up in 2 seconds. So then I went to another building in the UN with the security office, because I know many security guys there, and sat in the TV and watched on TV the second plane hit.
Yeah.
And then that day I walked across the Brooklyn Bridge. I wasn't close enough, thank God, no ash came on me and all that, but close enough to see the smoke. And as you get closer to the Brooklyn Bridge, seeing people covered, so yeah, in the days after, I went as close as I could near there. So that's my little story, but nothing like those who've given their life, of course, and others.
Absolutely. Well, I was telling Michelle, I worked for Morgan Stanley at the time, and I was a manager. And so one of the things they do with the managers is they would have them visit the World Trade Center, because they'd have a bunch of trainees that would come in. And so they'd bring managers from around the country, and we would spend a couple of days with the trainees role playing or doing whatever. And my wife was in law school at the time. I was living in El Paso, Texas, managing my first office. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stay the weekend. And I stayed at the World Trade Center Marriott, and checked out on Sunday and flew back home. And I was sitting in my office when it went down. And just by happenstance, back then they used to give you the airline boarding passes, right? And I still have mine. I have my room key, and I was doing Big Brothers, and I had a postcard that I'd filled out. It was the towers, and I never sent it. And so it's always, I just always think about those people and those friends. And here's the thing, though, and welcome everybody. We got Tony, we got Stephen, Stan, thanks for joining us. Rebecca, Mark, good morning. Like your t-shirt, my friend. So here was the thing, though, that I think about this morning. And, we talk about how do we feel, right? We always talk mentally, emotionally, physically. And I hope you guys are all feeling well. But the thing that keeps coming back, and it gives me hope, is how collective we were, the next day. How I don't know. I hold hope that we'll come back to that.
We won't.
You're probably right.
It's never going to happen.
It was a unique time. But anyway, well, listen, let's go around real quick. It's 8:05, and we have Michele Rigby Assad with us this morning. And I told Michele as she joined this morning, I just got her book a couple days ago, and we've got a few to hand out, as we always do. One is for me, but I told her my wife is going to love this book, because my wife has always said, she's a feisty small lady. She's always said she thought was supposed to be CIA or something like that as a secret agent. And I can't wait to share her this book. But Michele, I think Michele, let's introduce you, but let's do it this way. Michele joined the CIA 1 month before 9/11, and I
Close
just
to that.
close
Close
to that,
Yeah.
roughly around that time. But Michele, why don't you give us a little backstory as an intro as to how you got yourself into the CIA and how this all unfolded, and let you share your story with our group this morning.
Sure. So, I mean, one of the first questions people ask, like, how in the world do you get into the CIA? Which is a great question. And how it worked for me is that it started, sorry, my speakers just came on, of course, right? So when I graduated high school in 1991, I went on my first mission trip to Egypt to work in an orphanage as a volunteer for a month. And this kicked off like this very fascinating passion to try to understand the Middle East, because it was so different than what I knew growing up in Central Florida. So this little mission trip then got me into a semester abroad. So I spent a whole semester of my junior year in Egypt. And also we spent about 3 weeks in Israel and the West Bank. And then after that, after I graduated college, I ended up pursuing a master's degree in Arab studies, which is really weird because my family was like, what in the world do you do with a master's degree in Arab studies? Like, first of all, nobody ever heard of such a thing. And what are you going to do with that? And I had absolutely no idea. I was just going by this, like, I don't know if any of you guys have experienced this before, but that gut feeling that you have to do something. You just feel deep inside, like, I have to go this direction, even though you don't have an explanation for it. So that's what I was doing. And so I married my husband, Joseph, and he is actually originally from Egypt and grew up in a part of Egypt, a very interesting part of Egypt. Actually, he's from a village from where the roots of Al-Qaeda actually come from. So he grew up with kind of, it's very interesting because he's a Christian from that area. And I basically went to school with kids, oh, this is crazy, whose parents were cell leaders in Jamaat Islamiyah, which is the group that assassinated Sadat. And this is the group that eventually kind of grew into Al-Qaeda. So he came from the place in Egypt where that stuff comes from. So we get married, we move to DC, I get my master's in Arab studies, absolutely no idea what exactly we're gonna do with our education and experience. And long story short, we ended up applying to the CIA among many, many other jobs. And my husband gets hired and is going through training to be in the CIA. And I'm being told, this is like fall, probably like August of 2001, you're going to join the next group of trainees. So my husband's in training and he's in his final day of training. It's surveillance training in the CIA. So it's learning to see whether you're being followed, so that when you go to your meeting with your source, you don't get your source killed because you've identified them as your secret source. So Joseph's in the last day of surveillance training, and I was just told I'm going to start training in January 2002, when that moment we're all just talking about, the moment that our lives changed, the planes hit the World Trade Center, and then suddenly Joseph and I like looked at each other and said, wow, it all makes sense. Here we are at the forefront of this thing this thing that we didn't even know was going to happen, and we are going to be in the war on terror. And here we have a kid who grew up in crazy part of Egypt, and then a white girl that felt very passionate about learning something she knew nothing about from the Middle East, and here we are. And it was just meant to be. We were meant to do that, which is quite fascinating.
That's wow. Talk about and I don't mean right place at the right time, but it just unfolded for you in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
One of the questions, I think if we think about where we were at 9/11, what did that look like then? Were you deployed like immediately, or how did you get yourself, out into the field? And if you can share with us, where exactly were you guys? Because you spent 10 years over there.
Right.
And so paint us a picture of what that looked like for you, Michele.
Yeah, so our careers in the CIA were 10 years. And so what happened was you have an entire year of training, and it's called tradecraft training. So it's essentially learning how to conduct surveillance runs, meet clandestinely safely with your source. How do you recruit a source? How do you debrief a source for intelligence? So this whole thing, because it is a matter of life and death, because your ability to handle that source well means you're putting their life and your own life and their life, in your hands, it takes an entire year. So as soon as we got done with that training, so it was January 2002 through December, Joseph and I were deployed immediately to the Middle East because we already had language. Obviously, Joseph was a native speaker of Arabic, and I had gotten Arabic at Georgetown during my master's degree. And so while it took a lot of other people longer to get to the field, we went immediately. And so we're not allowed to talk about where we were for those 10 years, with the exception of we can say we were in Baghdad for a year for one of our tours. But if you might imagine the hardest places in the Middle East, we've probably been to all those places.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
interesting, because it's a lot of sacrifice, and we talked about that on the podcast a little bit. You missed family events, you missed a ton of things being over there, because it's not like you can just catch a flight and come home for a break and get yourself back in there, right?
Yeah, and one of the places that we lived, it was a very kind of ground zero for the counter-terrorism fight. And it was a very dangerous place, and we were not living on a compound, so we were just living in and amongst the people. And Al-Qaeda was all over that city. I mean, all over that country, but really all over that city. And so it was a very dicey existence. So every time we left our house, we had to look for hostile surveillance. Every time we left the place where we worked, we had to look for hostile surveillance. Because if the terrorists are going to set up on you, it's in known locations where you are. So it was constantly looking out for somebody, maybe standing there with an AK-47 or looking at their watch or monitoring your movements. So it was kind of an exhausting way to live, always being on your toes and always making sure that you're looking out just in case somebody's paying a little too much attention to you.
So I have a personal question then, and by the way, guys, if you have questions for Michele, just raise your hand, let me know. Go ahead, Ramon.
Oh, okay. I was just going to ask Michele, can you give us a sense, those of us who live in America, relatively safe in security, police? I was talking to a friend of mine, immigrated here from India. My sister lives in Mexico, as I'm assuming Michele know, and if I'm wrong, but other countries, it seems a lot of the world bribes and everything's not straight. Here you come to the DMV, pay the $49 and get it's pretty, I mean, there's stuff that happens, but we live in a great place. You go to CVS, there's no hanky-panky. So anyway, my point is, I don't even know how to ask this, and Rick, you can help me. I guess what I'm trying to say is, you've been in the beast, you've been in the vomit, in the muck, I'm assuming. So, do we have a sense of self-security here? Is there a lot of SH stuff that does go on that, Ramon, you would have no idea, or is it just TV? If that kind of makes sense, because on TV, CIA, FBI, the music's playing when the guy's going through the floor with a gun in his hand, going underneath somebody's legs, and Jack Bauer. That's all we know.
And that's exactly what it's like.
I'm sure it was, absolutely. So does it make sense what I'm trying to ask? Just, I guess, is there a sense of, Ramon, yes, we live very privileged, but outside these walls and in maybe Iraq, it's a total zoo and you wouldn't believe it? Or is it normal? I don't even know how to ask it, but I'm sure you can answer.
No, it is such a different world out there. And you're absolutely right. Your sense of how different kind of order is here. And of course, we know we have corruption in the United States, and we know we have issues We all know this, but it's so different than my experiences in the Middle East or Europe, Eastern Europe, and places like that, where it is so out of control, and you're living and breathing in a completely different environment. So that's hard. Like, suddenly you're thrust in the middle of whatever that country is.
Right here, we're used to just walking, and it's like everything's fine. You have to be trained probably to think of danger.
Right. I mean, just to give you I was so excited when we got to that first posting, and there was actually a grocery store. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I didn't expect a grocery store. I thought there were going to be like huts and things, and those things existed too. So we went into the grocery store, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So I'm walking up and down the aisles. I love to cook. I'm looking at, what's on the shelves, what can I buy? And I just get this weird, hair on the back of your neck. Like, how somebody's watching you or staring at you and just feel it. So I'm like, ooh, what is that? And I look over, and so just like most grocery store, there's like a wall of windows, and these men had their noses pressed up to the glass to look at me because my face was showing. And I was like, man, this is gonna be a really wacky 2 years, where you're the center of attention simply because your face is in the open.
So that begs a question to my mind, Michele.
Yeah.
So as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we're dealing with challenges all the time, and we have a tendency to get stressed out, right? And so I gotta imagine the level of stress that you felt on. Well, not just the level of stress, but the constant stress level. That feeling in your shoulders, right, where you never get to relax. How did you cope with that? What did you do to kind of, bring that down a notch, I guess, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, as an entrepreneur, when you're in charge of your own destiny, you're not working a 9-to-5 job. You're working every moment you get, really. And I think that what I learned in the war zones was that I couldn't put in the hours that I needed to work unless I took time out to go work out on the treadmill. You had to take time for, if you want to call it self-care, exercise, however you want to refer to that. And I realized that I had every single day at 4 p.m. I would stop, I'd leave, I'd change, I'd go work out in the gym that they had for us, and then go take a shower, grab food, and go back to my desk. And I know that sounds stupid, like that's not a big deal, but the volume of work that we were dealing with in Baghdad was so off the charts that, I know this is weird, but I was so busy that even when I went to the bathroom, I ran to the bathroom. I did my duty and I ran back to my desk. And when I got lunch, I ran to the chow hall, grabbed my lunch, never ate it sitting down, ran back to my desk and ate it there. There was no time to breathe. It was hair on fire every hour of the day. The location of the car bomb. Here's the location of the IED that they just buried. Here's the location of the safe house that we've been looking for. That stuff had to get immediately to the action elements. And there was no time to I'm tired. I'll wait till later to get that out. No, you got to take that call. You got to distribute that intelligence. So, but then I realized I couldn't get through the rest of the night unless I got my workout in. And those endorphins enabled me to have the energy that I needed to get to midnight to finish. Every night was 10 o'clock was an early night, 11 or 12 or 1 was a more typical ending time for me. So I think as an entrepreneur, it's easy to get so busy and get your brain kind of out of your constant, but you've got to go exercise, go take a walk, and it's important mentally, spiritually, physically, and emotionally, I think.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Any questions from the group? Because I've loaded for bear on questions, but this is your opportunity to ask Michele anything you'd like.
I have the second amount of questions, Rick, so I'm going to wait 2 more seconds. I'm just going to go for it. Any lessons learned? Thank you, Rick. Any lessons learned, Michele? And Rick, that may be part of his questions already, but just curious, what should we know as, when I say Americans, what I mean is those in a westernized, safe, everything's cool, no bombs around. Anything you tell us or tell your kids or tell my daughter, you know what I mean? Just what should we, and I'm sure that goes in a whole book, but what are 2 or 3 things you would just, Ramon, here's 3 things that I should do today or tomorrow or whatever. Any tips or insights?
I love this question. So, okay, this is a very tangible thing, very tangible story. You can't be on all the time. So you have to understand where you're vulnerable. So if, obviously if you're walking to your car at night in a dark parking garage, I'm vulnerable. I need to really pay attention to my surroundings. When your kids and your kids or your wife's safety is involved, these are things that then you really pay attention to. Who are they spending time with? Stuff like that. So you know when to kind of turn it on. Now, I remember I was in the middle of surveillance training, and it was a weekend, and we were with our family, and I had my niece, and she was about 6 years old. And so we went into the toy store to get her something, and we're walking down the aisle, and it was the Barbie aisle. And most of y'all are men. There's at least one, Rebecca, but y'all know what the Barbie aisle looks like, right? It's all hot pink. And so it's all hot pink, and I see this dude crouch down, and again, the hair on the back of my neck stood up when I saw this guy. He was like greasy, and he just looked misplaced. And I'm thinking, okay, what are you doing in the Barbie doll section? So I'm like looking around, does he have kids? If so, where are the kids? But like, it didn't just feel right or smell right. So I paid attention. As we walked down the aisle and as we got next to this dude, I watched his body language. His eyes went to my niece, with a look on his face that just shouted pedophile. Woo. So of course I'm like, I put my arms around her, and I like got in front of her and then ushered her out of the aisle. I think that if I had not been in the middle of surveillance training, I might not have noticed that. But because I was like more in tune to my environment, I noticed this guy, this potential danger. And so I just realized, like, you can train yourself to pay more attention, and then you talked about it, Ramon, you see things you might not normally recognize, potential dangers.
So that's great. Yeah, the hair on the back of the neck.
Listen to it. When that happens, don't ignore it. Yeah.
It's telling. So I'm curious, because I was, leafing through the book a little bit, and like I said, I think this is going to be one my wife's definitely going to read. I know I'm going to read it. There's great chapter titles in here, and I'm just curious if there was a story that sticks out in your mind that you could share that maybe is a little, be interesting for us to know, a little scary, or something where you really, like, it stayed with you all these years, that you'd be willing to share with us.
Yeah, so, that first tour, besides Baghdad, that first 2-year tour was by far the most difficult of our entire 10-year experience. So Baghdad and this particular place. And once we finished our tradecraft training, we were given paramilitary training. And for those people going to a war zone, you got this extra special stuff. So like what to do if you're being ambushed, how to respond to a vehicle ambush scenario. So if that's a criminal element, or if that's a terrorist, or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, how do you use your car to get out of that? So they called this exercise Get Off the X. And the idea is that wherever this attack is launched against you is called literally the X, okay? So this area is chosen by the terrorists because it gives them the best chance of getting to you. So it represents their area of greatest strength. So the idea is you do whatever you have to do to get off the X. And if your vehicle is operable, you drive off the X. If it's not operable, you got to get out of your car and run. And although that sounds really basic, when you're in the middle of like a terrorist attack, it's very confusing, and people often freeze. So you have that either fight, flight, or freeze response. And so what they're trying to do is train you out of the freeze response, like basically do anything but freeze. So we practice all these scenarios where you actually got in your car, y'all geared up, and then they take you into the woods, and they have people with their heads wrapped looking like Al-Qaeda, and they're attacking the car with flashbang grenades and all kinds of stuff. So anyway, they teach you and then they kill the car, like they kill the engine. And so then you got to get out of the car and run the right direction. And I actually have colleagues who died because they ran in the wrong direction. So they accidentally ran right towards where the terrorists were. So it's just trying to get your brain to like slow down and make a good decision in that moment. So I was very cognizant that I might have to apply this training in the field because of the place I was going. And to give you some context for that, the place where we were stationed was one of the kidnapping capitals of the world, kidnapping and carjacking. So I was very aware of the fact that as a non-local, that I kind of had a big X on me. And so my husband blended more obviously than I did, but in any case, I was driving to work one day by myself and Joseph was out of the country, and I came to stop at a stoplight, and a gentleman was crossing the road in front of me, and he stopped in the middle of the road when he looked up through the windshield and he saw my uncovered face. I was very conservative the way I would dress, very respectful, very conservative, but I never covered my head, and I certainly never covered and prevented myself from being able to see as I was driving a vehicle. So anyway, he stops, he sees me, and he is, I guess, overwhelmed by the excitement. And so he starts a Weinstein kind of thing in the middle of the road, if you catch my drift. And in all my years of in the Middle East, all my studies, all my traveling, I've never seen anyone literally stop and do such a thing in public. Like, really? In public? Right here in the middle of the day? Like, I was so embarrassed, you guys. I was like, I just wanted to melt. I was like, this cannot be happening. I've never seen this before. This is stupid. This is crazy. Like, what the heck? But so anyway, I realized though in that moment that a car had pulled up beside me, and I was at the side of the road. So the curb was right here, and there was stuff right now, like poles on the curb. And I'm thinking, I was taught in situations like this, you got to leave yourself some space, but I really didn't have any space. So I was thinking about, and then a car pulled up beside me. So now I'm like locked in, right? Which is fine, except for it wasn't just this dude doing this thing in front of me, but now all the locals are curious. What is getting his attention? What's going on in that car? So I can see like through my mirrors and everything that these men are coming from every direction, and I'm alone in the car. And a lot of the kidnappings in that country were targets of opportunity, meaning they weren't like looking for you, but there you are, and whoosh. So at that time, the tribesmen were kidnapping Westerners and selling them to Al-Qaeda to make money. So it was an economic choice, essentially. And my husband and I had always told each other, like, you can never get taken. You just can't. You can never, like Oprah says, never go to the second location. You cannot get taken. You will never come back. And indeed, people were kidnapped, sold to Al-Qaeda, and beheaded on video. And we knew that's how it ended. So as I am starting to be surrounded by all of these men, I had a moment where suddenly the whole get off the X thing kicked in, and I was like, oh my God. And we had been told, like, you have to decide ahead of time. It's either them or me. And I am not going to get taken. It's not going to be me. I am not going to get my head chopped off. And so I decided I don't even think I decided, guys. It literally was like kind of just happened. I put my foot, and I should add, this is a country where they like walk around with AKs slung over their shoulders, and they have knives. So, I mean, I have all of this going on. So I just took my car and I hit the gas, and I hit the guy. I hit him. And then son of a gun knocked him over. He stood back up and continued. I was like, you piece of crap. So I was like, I'm yelling in Arabic, I'm yelling in English. I'm like, get out of the way, I will run you over. Well, I had to hit him a second time harder. This time he fell back again, and he's totally shocked. He finally gets up and walks out because I was ready to run him over. Thankfully I didn't have to, but he finally like walked to the sidewalk, and I blew through the red light, and I didn't stop for another red light or stop sign the whole way back to work, and shook for like probably an hour afterwards.
I was just thinking, like, how do you come off of that, right? It took you did pretty much all day to just kind of get your wits about you?
The adrenaline had me going for a good hour, like shaking like this. And for a couple hours, it was just hard to even think of anything or focus, because I just realized how close I came to something really, really bad going down. Yeah, worse than that. But in any case, it was interesting because as I had to do that, every time we came back to DC between assignments and we were going to another war zone, we had to go back through that training, get off the X over and over and over again. And I suddenly thought about the fact that, wow, the X is representative of so much more than like a situation of an ambush. The X is also reminds me of our comfort zone. The X is the safe. It's hard to get off the X because we're scared, we're in shock, we're intimidated, we're uncertain what happens next. The X is a place that's very difficult to get off of. But you have to remind yourself, if I sit here in the X, I will die. And so the idea is you've got to do whatever it takes to move yourself off the X. And sometimes you can drive, but sometimes your tires are shot out and you can roll on your rims, but sometimes you can no longer drive off the X. It's okay. Get out and run. And if you can't run, get out and walk. And if you can't walk, get out and crawl. So I like to tell people, especially as entrepreneurs, because you're always making decisions about what's next, but there's uncertainty, there's intimidation, there's all kinds of stuff. Just crawl. Sometimes, I know, Rick, you're working on that book. I'm working on this curriculum, this online training, and sometimes I can barely get it together, but I just crawl. I did one thing today, or I got this accomplished today. Doesn't matter, just crawl.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we appreciate your service first and foremost, because I know it was a sacrifice. And
Thank you.
you know, that moment when you talk about that, that's a moment that is a life altering moment, and you just wonder if you put yourself in that position, in that car, in that situation. You know, it's the old, what would you do? And the training, it's interesting because the training saved your life, right? And just like entrepreneurs, the education and the ongoing training in the community of people are so vital to our success. Sometimes you never know what's going to resonate with somebody. Let's, if we can, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about now, today. You're in the States, you just come back. And as I thought about you today and having you on, the one thing that kind of hit me is, you know, you had a choice to make. You could have gone to work for somebody else, right? And nobody would have said anything. Hey, you've done your service. You could have stayed in the government somehow and that kind of thing. But you chose to go be an entrepreneur. And you did a couple other things. But, you know, Jim, our friend Jim Witt's with us today, and he's big on purpose. And so I'm just curious, like, what drove you to decide to go the direction that you are today?
Yeah, so it was a really tough 10-year career. So the kind of story I just shared with you is not, unfortunately, all that unusual. So after the 10 years, I felt like intuitively again that it's hard to describe. I just had this intuitive sense that we had a greater purpose outside the government, and that whatever we were supposed to do was supposed to use the lessons that we had learned to help other people. So it was very scary because, as you mentioned, a government job, hey man, you've got a great job your whole life if that's what you want. And so we had to jump out of that very safe boat into the uncertain waters, and that was very scary. But we amazingly, and by the grace of God, successfully transitioned to working for ourselves. We are security consultants. And so we were based out of Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates for 4 years. Then we returned to the United States, and we continue that work now, basically helping American companies doing business in the Middle East because it's such a completely different and unique environment. I also wrote a book, Breaking Cover, that you alluded to, and that was that book is all about purpose. It's all about figuring out what your purpose is and not being scared to pursue it, even when it is absolutely terrifying, which it has been for me. And then I'm also a public speaker. So as many entrepreneurs, you do a lot of things, right? You're kind of gritty, and you kind of do as many things as, and you have the freedom to make those choices. So I know that doesn't always work out for people, but I'm very grateful that it actually has worked out for us.
Yeah, well, good. Well, let's open it up again. Do we have any questions from our group this morning? Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually got two questions. I'm going to say them both. One is, now I watched the series called Americans about the
Yes.
Russian spies. So I know you and your husband weren't quite like that. You know, they were a little crazy. But my question is, were you and your husband a team, or maybe you were a team on some things and you weren't a team on others, and did you have to keep secrets from each other? And then my other question is, are you ever really out of the CIA? I mean, can they
We'll
call?
start with that one first, because that one's really easy. Yeah, you are. And it's a weird culture. Like, CIA is very strange. Like in other countries, you're kind of always still linked back to the mothership. Like Brits, once they leave intelligence, they can report stuff back. Like if they come across something that's helpful, they can feed it back to their government. Man, once you leave the CIA, don't let the door hit you as you walk out. It's very weird, very strange. But so that's that. So yeah, it's very fascinating. So Joseph and I had the exact same clearance, and we were working in the exact same office. And so we both had access to all the same stuff. So were there joint ops? Yes, sort of. So in the sense of, okay, like when Joseph's kicking off to run a surveillance route so he can go to his meeting, I might do counter surveillance for him. And then I would have a signal like, yeah, no, I didn't see anything when you launched. You should be okay from this end. We would help each other find targets. So like we would go to certain events and we would have particular people that we were looking for. So we would both, split up in the room, and then, I might find the target before he does. So I'll circle back around, like he's right over there. He's drinking coffee right now. Like he's dressed like this. Or, oh my gosh, helping each other prepare for meetings, because there's so much that you have to, like, to prepare for a 2-hour meeting might take you a week. So don't forget to ask these questions, or how do you think I should handle this? Or I'd tell Joseph before he launches to meet with his insurgent leader friend. You're gonna search him before he gets in the car, right? Make sure he's not wearing like explosive belt. Yes, got it. Okay, good. It's like, can you bring home the belt? Can you search him for explosives? Like that's the strange things we would ask each other. Trying to think what else. For us, it was helpful that we were both Arabists. So we were in the same place, we had the same targets, we were doing the same things. So we were always like helping each other out. I hope that.
Hey, Rick, I have to add in, if I may. This is Ramon.
Yes.
Rick, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It sounds like, Michelle, that wasn't that difficult. My wife does the same thing to me. Did you get your wallet? Did you get your keys?
Exactly.
That's simple. Come on. Did you bring back the milk? Come on.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's exactly how it worked. Yep.
And I imagine Joseph's nodding his head. Yes, that's exactly.
I know in my business, my wife, about 3 years ago, she recently started working in my accounting and tax business. And it was funny because I always thought, oh my goodness, if she ever comes and starts working for me, we'll be in marriage counseling in 3 months. And but it was the opposite, because I felt like we had a lot of strengths with both of us being so opposite and being able to come together in the business. She's got some ownership, but it sounds that's kind of like with you two as well. You could bounce off of each other's strengths and weaknesses. And
Yes.
yeah.
Who knows you better than your spouse, right? You know each other's strengths, you know each other's weaknesses, so you like, don't forget this, or yeah, that's exactly the same thing. But that's cool that that's worked out so well for you.
Yeah. Any other questions for Michelle? Well, Michelle, so I have a question.
Yes.
So here you guys are in business, right? And so as you look back from coming back to the States, starting your business to where you are today, what's different, right? Like, what have you learned? What's pivoted along your journey that stands out in your mind that you'd be willing to share?
You know, for us, the thing that made the difference was we had a couple of relationships with people in the industry who knew us. And so they were able to throw business our way. Because otherwise, you guys, most businesses work off of, well, as we used to say, the Rolodex, right? We didn't have a Rolodex. We didn't have, you know, a huge Twitter following or Facebook or LinkedIn or any of that. Like, we didn't have social media. We had nothing, but we had a couple of people who knew us well enough and who was able to throw business our direction. So our pivot was being able to find reliable sources of business that could help us out. Had we not had that, I don't think we could have done it. So it's not, I think a lot of people are like, it's not, it's kind of magical how you make a business work. Well, not really. Like, it requires support in the right places. So I don't know if that answers your question about the pivot. That's what made our pivot possible.
No, it's good. You know, that we were talking a little bit, for those of you that haven't checked out the podcast, which I highly recommend, kind of a different conversation, but we talked about, like, you had a lot of speaking engagements and things lined up, like a lot, like I know Ramon and other people, myself included. So we've had to adjust. I think I'm trying to think of an alternative word to pivot, because I think it's getting overused, but like, we've adjusted, right? And have you found that your background has helped you? You talked about fight, flight, or freeze. That's something we've been talking about since March with our community, and was one of the bases for these calls, is just a community to come together to get to know people and hear other stories. But did that help you through March and April, as we're in this year with COVID? And I joked the other day, I'm just waiting for the spaceship to come down. That's the only thing missing this year. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know if that question's phrased right, but you get what I'm asking.
Yeah, so I think because the kinds of things we dealt with in the CIA were so extreme, and the kind of unknowns that we dealt with, we lived in a world of unknowns. So for us, I don't mean to belittle this, because I know for a lot of people, they're not used to that. And so this is a stressful time, and a lot of people have lost their jobs, and obviously that is very difficult. But I would say that unknowns to us, we're used to dealing in that world. So it doesn't throw us for a loop. It's like, okay, we have another set of circumstances to deal with. So you just, I would just say we've been practiced in that area. So it's easy for us to think, okay, well, I had 33 speaking events last year. Great, that's not going to be this year. So now I am, okay, you suddenly have all this time on your hands that you didn't anticipate. That training program that you've wanted to put together for 6 years, if you can't do it now, then when? So it basically took away all my excuses to do this big project that's been on my heart for a while. So I would just encourage you to listen to that thing inside your heart, that thing that you've been wanting to do. And if you can, now's a great time to do it.
Great advice. Great advice. All right. Any other questions for Michele this morning?
I'll just add, this is Ramon again, that the importance of training, I think I used to, as I said, I used to work at the UN. So it reminds me of talking to the diplomatic security gentlemen and ladies, many became friends with. They never looked me in the eye as we were talking. They always looked somewhere else. They knew me, I'm not a threat, but hey, what's up? How was your weekend? We're laughing, talking about stupidity, whatever. But meaning, let's say this is me, the camera. They would always, yeah, Ramon, we're doing great. We're doing good. Yeah, all is well. Yeah, me and my wife, man, you're right. She said this and stop, miss, stop. So to your point of the awareness,
Yeah.
obviously it was drilled into them. We're friends. They're holding a conversation, and they were not doing their job, but the training of, they weren't just so focused like this. They were still observing their post, as it were, if you get what I'm saying, meaning that the uniformed guys at diplomatic missions still able to chill and talk, but that discipline. So I guess it must be training that they didn't get sidetracked. I'm just affirming what you said.
I mean, you had asked, earlier, is there a lot of stuff going on that we don't know about? So again, I was in the middle of surveillance training, so maybe that's why, and I was in Northern Virginia, and obviously my antenna was way up. I was walking through Target, And I see a guy doing surveillance. Like, he had an earpiece in his ear, and I was like, whoa. Now, I don't know if I might have noticed that if I was in the middle of surveillance training, but no one else on target, nobody else milling around noticed this guy like behind the shoe rack with an earpiece, clearly following what we call the rabbit. I wasn't sure that I ever found out who the rabbit was. And then I saw another guy over here. So I don't know if I just walked into an FBI surveillance operation, but like, clearly something was going on.
That
It
was,
looked pretty official too.
it's funny. A friend of mine works at the FBI as well, and I saw him on the street. But I don't know, because I watched too many movies, I didn't even approach him. We made eye contact, but I just ignored him because he was like, Ramon, thank you. But like you said, ironic. I'm seeing my friend on Grand Central. He's just looked at it because he's my friend. I knew it was at a place. He's just standing there, and I'm like, and I just kept moving. Then an hour later, I waited for him to me.
Right.
I and say, hey, Bob, how are you?
He might not be Bob that day, right? Like,
Exactly.
It might be Dave. So the other situation, this is so weird that I never thought of how many actually occurred in that couple-month period when I was in training. But it was a weekend, and I was driving to the Kennedy Center for an event, and there was a water treatment facility that was passing in Arlington. And as I came around the corner, there was a car, and there were two dudes in this car that had the look potentially of being Middle Eastern, and Arab world is my thing, so I kind of keyed in on that. And I could see the guy's hands out the window taking a photograph of the water treatment facility. And it ain't pretty, y'all. It wasn't like, oh, look at that beautiful water treatment facility right there. I just must get a photograph of that. So clearly, like, not normal. So I was going the other direction. So I was like, oh, no, you don't. This is in the shadow of 9/11. And I like blew through red lights and turned around, made U-turn, and they got on I-95 and 395, and I got in after them. And I was like, I'm gonna get that tag. So I did. I got the tag number, and I got the description of the passengers, and I, sent it in a tip line to the FBI. But anyway, the fact that I saw the camera and this and this and this, again, eyes open, noticed some crazy things.
You definitely look at the world a little differently. And it's interesting. It's just being more aware, right, of the surroundings. And I think, bring it back to business. What sticks in my mind, Michelle, when I hear you say that is a lot of people go, oh, that's just, they'll blow it off, right? They'll just, oh, it's not a big deal, or it's not my issue. But I think whether it's security or business, it's really important that we challenge ourselves in our thinking, and we're more aware of what's going on, because things change in a hurry. And if we just kind of brush it off, it can cause problems.
Awareness is critical when you're running your own business, and when you need to pivot, or you're developing this or that. And then if you are aware, and if you are keyed in, signs or advice or good ideas, they will come your way. But if you're turned off, you're not gonna get them. So now I'm like helping my husband build his first website, and we are not techies, but it's interesting how when you're aware and you're asking people for help, the help does come, and it comes from a very interesting angles, but you just got to be aware and asking for it, and looking for it.
Absolutely. All right, guys, well, we're coming towards the end. I'm going to give one more chance for questions, if anybody's got one.
Well, Rick, if I could, this is Stan. Michelle, first of all, thank you for being here. This is very, very interesting.
Thank you.
I'm an old guy, so you're taking me back in a time in my career that I was an intel analyst for NSA in the military.
Ooh.
And questions I wanted to ask you, as you're collecting data and you're disseminating that to the agencies and doing all those sorts of things, what was your, and you may not be able to disclose this, were you there as of course you're there as a CIA analyst, but were you there under another cover job, you and your husband? Were you were you there as some other cover besides just a CIA analyst? And you may not be able to answer that.
Yeah, so you're right. They don't let us talk about cover at all.
Yeah.
But we were there not as analysts. So we were there as, so the way that the agency is split up, there's administration, analysts, operations. So we were in the operations side of the house. And within that structure, my husband was an operations officer. I was a kind of mix. So I was a collection management officer. So you might be familiar with that terminology.
Yes,
from being in intelligence, a CMO, and also an operations officer. So I was, my job was to help the collectors meet with their sources and gather the right intelligence, answer the right questions. Then once they got that back, vet that information. Like, is that good or is it not? And I think what most people don't realize, it is not hard to collect intelligence. And you probably know this, Dan. It's really hard to collect good intelligence.
exactly.
So we get shoveled crap constantly. And you've got to get really good at like figuring out, this is fabricated, this is embellished, this is fabricated, this is, oh, this is good. That's what we need. So you learn to evaluate information and vet sources very quickly.
Yeah, well, I agree. We used to triangulate. I don't know if you use those terms anymore these days, but we had to have 3 sources, all this sort of stuff to do these things. And the reason I asked that, I was under the, the administrative operations of NSA, working for them from the USIDs and all the things that we used in those days. But we were under the cover of military uniform. All right, so we're on a military base. We don't even operate out of that base. We operate out of a completely secret area, but we were there under the guise of being in the military, which we were in the military, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
Working for NSA administratively, and that was our cover. So I was just thinking, you're in the Middle East, you're an American woman. There had to be some sort of cover that you're under, that you're operating as an accountant or a psychiatrist or something for people, and you're really there collecting the data and giving it back to the analyst to do that. No, it's you're taking me way back in time, but very interesting. I also like the comments about the situational awareness. Yeah, we went through the same things. I do have one story. My wife, we were in Omaha, Nebraska at Offutt Air Force Base, and we didn't have cell phones in those days, no way to contact me, anything like that. I come out of the bunker, come home, and she just said, Stan, there's been 2 gentlemen standing around. They keep moving around outside the apartment building, and they're watching us, I think. And I told her, always be aware of what's going on. And of course, you were married to someone in the CIA. I couldn't talk about what I did. So the whole thing was, Pam, be situational aware of what's going on at all times. And they're just doing surveillance to make sure we weren't doing anything crazy or having wild parties or doing stuff like that. So you're taking me back in time, and it's a very interesting conversation. I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think cover is such a fascinating question. People are just dying to know, like, what did you tell people that you did every day? But I would also add something kind of like something surprising. When you're in places like the Middle East and you, have a white face like mine, and it's assumed you're CIA. It does not matter what your cover is. Like, everybody just says, you must be CIA. And I had people on the street tell me that. I met people all the time that said that, and I'm just like, that's hilarious. But the assumption is that you are an undercover agent because you don't fit into this environment. So you almost have to operate, you just have to operate like everyone already knows you are an officer. So your tradecraft has to be absolutely excellent to not get yourself or your source in trouble.
That is good. I mean, this has been great, Michele, and we're coming up on the hour. And so, I want to give you a chance to share any last minute thoughts, but guys, remember, I don't know if you can see that, but Breaking Cover is the name of Michele's book. One of you has already gotten a copy coming your way. I have 2 more to give out. Don't forget my question of the week, which was, we're Epic Business Advisory. shoot me an email. I want you to take a jab at what you think EPIC stands for, and I will give the answer out with the recording as we send back the replay to everybody. But I've got 2 books. You don't even have to be right. I just want to see what you think on that. So Michele, and by the way, if you haven't checked out the podcast, please be sure. I got to give a plug, but check out this week's podcast. Michele was our guest, and she talks a little more about her career, the book, and what she's doing now. So Michele, any parting words of wisdom, any thoughts to leave us with today?
Yeah. Oh, I just wish you the best. I think you have a fantastic community there, and you surround yourself with winners when you want to be a winner, and you share ideas and you push each other forward, and just don't be scared to continue getting off the axe, as I'm sure all of you are very, very good at doing already, but also helping others get off the axe.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Guys, I appreciate you on this 9/11 anniversary date. I hope, like you, thinking about where I was at that moment. And again, I hold out hope that maybe we rally at some point, as a community, as a country. But I wish you the best this weekend. Stay safe and know we're pulling for you. So until we see you next time, have a great
Thanks,
weekend.
everybody.
Thank you, Michele.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.